أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين سيما بقية الله في الأراضين وحجته على الخلائق أجمعين سيدنا وإمام زماننا وصاحب نعمتنا وولي أمرنا مهدي هذه الأمة وطاووس أهل الجنة الحجة بن الحسن العسكري فداه أرواح العالمين. My very dear and respected learned scholars, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, I've been given this topic, which is rather deliberately mysterious. I didn't choose it. It was a bunch of brothers, as you can imagine. No sisters involved. And if the guys back there can cue some suspenseful horror music so that I could actually say what this is about, or at least give me a little bit of echo to add some ambience of drama. Well, the good news is, we're talking about temporary marriage, as I'm sure you already knew very well. The bad news is I've only got about 20 minutes to talk about it. And that means that there is quite a lot of material that we have to rush through, and we don't want to rush through mut'a now, do we? So I'll try and compress as much information within the allocated time as I can. And allow me to start with a few frequently asked questions. Question number one, what is mut'a? Well, it's a form of marriage where the expiry date is preset within the legal structure, within the contract itself. That's basically what mut'a is. Question number two, is it permissible? And the answer is absolutely. It's been enshrined in the Quran. It's been delineated by the Prophet and the Imams. It's been extrapolated by generation after generation of scholars and learned erudites. So if you're not convinced that mut'a is a legal marriage contract in Islam, then you probably shouldn't be here, because that discussion was over a long, long time ago. As a matter of fact, and this is one way you can respond to the skeptics and the ones who cast doubt as to the validity of mut'a, is to say that every single Muslim scholar, every single companion, every single person who ever said anything about mut'a already believes that mut'a was enshrined in the Quran, that it was made legal by the Holy Prophet, by Allah rather, and delivered to the people through the Holy Prophet of Islam. The only difference of opinion lies in the fact that some say that even though this was it was codified in the Quran, it was later retracted, it was later banned, right? So that's where the difference lies between the two major schools of thought in Islam. But in principle, it is absolutely accepted. End of discussion. Question number three, what is the philosophy of mut'a? Why was this made a legal form of marriage in the religion of Islam? Essentially, in the religion that came to replace all previous divine revelations, to complete and bring to fruition all revelations from God. A religion that was intended for mankind until the end of days. Think about that. To make mut'a a legal form of matrimony is a big deal. And the question is, why? What's the philosophy? And this is the meat of the talk, if you like. There is another question that I might be able to get to later on, or perhaps we could get it out of the way now, and that is, well, how do you perform mut'a? What is required for the contract to be valid? And again, it's very simple. It's the exact same marriage contract, except that you insert an additional clause. That clause has to do with the expiry of the contract. So it comes with a preset expiry date, and that has to be stipulated in the contract. If that is done, then what you have is a temporary marriage. So, why mut'ah? And to shed some light on this, if I may, allow me to begin with an introduction. Islam is an all-encompassing religion. It's a comprehensive solution. It's not some idea that was proposed to address economic woes. It wasn't some concept that was provided by the Prophet in order to address the social dilemmas of the people who lived in 7th century Arabia. Islam is a religion that came to address our problems comprehensively and in an all-encompassing fashion, right? And what that means is that like an engine of an automobile, if you know anything about engines, and I don't know much, you will know that sometimes you have the tiniest of faults, the tiniest problem that can render the engine incapable of turning on or doing what it's intended to do. The car simply won't turn on. The ignition won't turn on because you've got some tiny problem in the engine somewhere. Why? Because you've got too many moving parts. Because it's such a sophisticated system that if one part fails, all other parts will not be able to function as they are supposed to. And so the whole system has to be taken into account when you examine any individual part. You have to understand the entire system. If one part falters or has any problems or breaks, you need to understand all about engines before you fix that part. You can't just say, I'll specialize in this part, I don't need to know anything about the rest of the system. And in Islam, one of the primary functions of this religion is to uproot our tendency towards evil. Mankind has an instinctual tendency towards evil, but at the same time, there is divine guidance in the form of our upright nature, which tries to correct those inclinations and provide guidance and light in the midst of darkness. And so because that inclination exists toward evil, Islam came to address all of the problems involved and uproot the foundations of evil, to prevent mankind from deviating into the traps of shaitan, the traps of our self-conceited nature. And one of the ways to do that, one of the biggest and most important ways to do that, is through the institution of marriage. That is why we have traditions where the Holy Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him and his holy progeny, has said, مَا بُنِيَ فِي الْإِسْلَامِ بِنَاءٌ أَعْظَمْ مِنَ التَّزْوِيجِ. Think about these words. He says, there is no other institution in the most absolute form in Islam that is greater and more sublime than the institution of marriage. Which is strange because, again, it's a very comprehensive system. There are so many aspects in Islam. I mean, I could think of 100 other things which the Prophet could have pointed out as being the most important institutions. Like spirituality, for instance. And yet the Holy Messenger of Allah chooses marriage and highlights its significance and its importance. Why? Because through marriage, a lot of other problems are solved. When marriage is facilitated, when marriage is made accessible, when people are able to get married, when this institution is within their reach, a lot of problems are solved. This is why we have traditions, famously, where the Prophet and the Imams have stressed over and over again that if you get married, you will complete half of your religion. Half of your religion, think about that, is already secured, is guaranteed. You've ensured half of your religion if you get married. If you recite those 6 or 7 words and get into a marriage contract, then you can rest assured that God will look after half of your religious and spiritual needs. The other half, you still have to struggle, you still have to toil. This is the whole purpose of life on this earth, to struggle. But isn't that amazing though? More amazing is when we have traditions where the Imam, for instance, Imam al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi says, quotes the Holy Prophet. He says, قال رسول الله إذا تزوج الشاب في حداثة سنه عج شيطانه يا ويله. When a young man or woman marries at an early age, because you can call yourself young at heart when you're 60, that's not what the Imam is talking about. He's being very specific. He says, a young person at an early age. In other words, as soon as they reach puberty, as soon as they reach physical maturity, as soon as they get to a level where they begin to fully appreciate and understand those sexual urges that they have. The Imam quotes the Prophet as having said, if you do that, if you do get married, the devil, the demon, whatever force, demonic force that's assigned to deviate you, to misguide you, will scream in pain and agony. Ajja shaytanu, ya waylah. This demonic spirit says, that's it. I have no chance of deviating this man or woman anymore. Then the Prophet quotes that demonic force as saying, لَقَدْ أَحْصَنَ مِنِّي ثُلُثَيْ دِينِهِ. He or she has ensured, has secured 2/3 of his or her religion from me. Then the Prophet says, فَلْيَتَّقِ اللَّهَ الْعَبْدُ فِي الثُّلُثِ الْآخَرِ. All you have now is 1 remaining 1/3 in your religion. Hold on to it, protect it, because the other is taken care of. Isn't that amazing? And so this institution, which not only fixes social problems, prevents children being born out of wedlock, prevents problems where you have this generation of people. You know, I remember reading a book which talked about the declining crime rate in the United States towards the end of the 1990s. And very interesting book. And it talked about all the various reasons that you could point to explain why crime began to decline. And it postulates quite a number of hypotheses. For instance, an increase in the number of policing. You know, police on the street were increased in places like LA and New York. You had a greater crackdown on crimes and harsher sentences and so on and so forth. And then it debunks all of these different hypotheses and says none of those account for the fact that crime was declining at such a rapid rate. And the only hypothesis that the author chooses to explain this phenomenon is Roe versus Wade, is the fact that abortion became legal in the United States and we no longer had children who were born out of wedlock, who didn't have parents to look up to, who didn't have fathers to look after them. Because we prevented these children, a whole generation of children from being raised on the streets, we also cracked down on crime. I mean, there are so many things wrong with this. I don't know where to begin. But the point here is that this is a major social dilemma that Islam solves through marriage. Now, the point I want to get to is this. It's a big engine, too many moving parts. You mess with one part, you mess with the whole system. If marriage became inaccessible, if marriage, as our dear learned scholars pointed out earlier, became a burden, if it became too difficult and too out of reach for young men and women, if people at the age of 18 laughed at the prospect of getting married at that age, laughed at the idea that they would even be welcomed into somebody's home if they came asking for their daughter's hand in marriage, if this became a laughing stock, then you know the system is going to break down. How does it break down? Well, we have what we have today. You don't have to look far. We have a major problem. We have a crisis, brothers and sisters. This crisis also, I want you to think about this, I don't want to talk about it too much. But the fact that marriage is so inaccessible is linked directly to the high divorce rates we have in the community. And I had the evidence to show that. The very high divorce rates that we have are caused in great part by the fact that people just aren't able to get married at a young age, and in a way that is within their means. So what do you do when you have a problem? Well, you try to fix the main core issues. If someone has high temperature, one of the things that doctors look for is what? An infection. So they start examining their throat, their lungs, right? Why do they do that? How come doctors don't start by just putting an ice block on your head, on your forehead? Although if the temperature is too high, they do that. But generally speaking, they know that a fever is a symptom of another underlying problem. And that is most likely some kind of an infectious disease. So you fix that problem before you get to the symptoms. By band-aiding and patching the symptoms, you're not going to fix it. Marriage needs to become more accessible. Marriage, and this is something that you might be thinking, all right, well, this isn't my problem. We need to have the older generation present for us to be talking about this. But it does have everything to do with you. Number one, because one day you will be parents. One day, for those of you who are not married, you'll be married, you'll have kids, those kids will grow. And the one thing you should never ever do is put them in the same position that you're in today. Once they get to the age where they're ready to get married, and by ready I don't mean they get some PhD in marital relations, I mean they get to the level where they can mate with another human being, then you facilitate that option for them. Present them with the option. If they choose to take it, let them take it. How disheartening is it? How traumatizing is it that we have young men and women who are almost forced to plead with their parents, literally beg their parents, so that marriage becomes facilitated for them. And it's not like you have to spell it out loud. You don't have to say it. Parents, one thing I say to them all the time is, all you need to do to understand what your son and daughter are going through at this age, when they're 17 and 18 and 19 years old, is to remember the time when you were 17, 18, and 19. And remember the fact that you were nothing but one big pile of desire and temptation. That's how you were. So what are you doing torturing them? Let them get married. Let them follow the tradition of Rasulullah and the Imams and the Ahlul Bayt. So, that's the core problem, needs to be treated. But what if that is not available as an option in the short term? What do? Mut'ah is a very viable and important option which needs to be discussed. I thank the organizers for putting this program together, inviting all of these learned scholars, of whom I am the least, to come and to address these issues out in the open, in public. Why is it that our young men and women have to look to the internet and look to illicit sources of information when it comes to these matters? Sexuality is a major issue. It's something that completely encapsulates young men and women. It's probably something they can't get out of their minds. It needs to be discussed. It needs to be discussed out in the open. So, mut'ah is an option that's available. Obviously, just like marriage itself, there are some conditions. There are some issues that you need to take into account. But mut'ah is deliberately made easier, in the sense that with permanent marriage, obviously there are so many strings attached. There are so many conditions that, as we've discussed, it's become so difficult now. With the dowry problems that Sheikh Hamid, may Allah bless him, referred to, that's a huge issue. In countries like India, I wouldn't be surprised if it's an issue in India, but in Iran, a predominantly Shia country, it's the bride's family, which has to pay a form of dowry to the groom's family. Where did that come from? Where did that come from? It didn't come from Islam. It came from some pagan tradition, God knows where. What needs to happen is for our cultures to be purified. And if they are, brothers and sisters, and as I said, it starts with you. Don't blame this on your parents, even though they're partly to blame. It starts with you. If our cultures are purified, if we can restore them back to what the Prophet and the Imams intended, then wallahi, brothers and sisters, we will have lives filled with pleasure and happiness. Lives that have been absolutely infused with desires that are satisfied in the most beautiful form. Samahat Sheikh Nami Farhat discussed intimacy between husband and wife, right? But why do we have problems? Again, it's a big, gigantic engine. Let me share a hadith with you. And I thank Sheikh Nami for breaking the ice, because I get to talk about these things. Let me share a hadith with you. It's in Wasa'il al-Shia, one of our preeminent sources of traditions from the Holy Prophet and the Imams. Listen to what the Prophet says. The Prophet says that a wife should not go to bed before قبل أن تعرض نفسها على زوجها, before she presents her husband with the option of intimacy. But if that was it, there'd be nothing awkward about me telling you this hadith. Sadly, the Prophet gets into details. The Prophet then says that by giving the option to the husband, what I mean is that she strips down, goes into his blanket, and touches him so that her skin is touching his skin. If he then chooses to forfeit this option, it's his loss. The Prophet doesn't say that, I say that. But if that did happen, let's just imagine some utopian paradise where this did happen, where the husbands fulfilled all of their obligations and the wives fulfilled all theirs. Would we even need to talk about Ashley Madison? Would this be a problem, do you think? Would we talk about adultery and fornication? Would we even have to discuss the idea that we have husbands cheating on their wives? Would we? The Holy Prophet says that one of the obligations of a woman, obligation isn't always a wajib, by the way. It could be a moral obligation. One of the obligations is that a wife greets her husband at the door when he comes back home. Now you might say, I'm not that kind of woman. And that's no problem. But if you want to follow the tradition of Rasulullah, the tradition of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the tradition of the Imams, then they've given us, don't think of it as some divine obligation that's been sent down to make your life miserable. Think of it as a formula for success. Think of it as a means for creating harmony and love and pleasure. When the Prophet says, for instance, that a husband should every once in a while pick up a bite of food and put it in his wife's mouth. I mean, talk about romance in Islam. Talk about how this religion came in order to provide an environment conducive for harmony and love and compassion and kindness. If we did these things, Sheikh Nami spoke about how we should express our love for one another every once in a while. Say it, speak it, vocalize it. Don't wait until it's Valentine's Day. In Islam, every goddamn day is Valentine's Day. And to conclude, brothers and sisters, mut'ah is an available option. But what if it's abused, is a common response that we hear. Well, what if marriage is abused? You have the law and you have the law breakers. Just because the law has been codified, has been created so that people would benefit from it, and someone might be there to exploit the law, to break it, doesn't invalidate the law in itself. Right? You go out the street here, and most streets have a speed limit of 60 kilometers an hour, right? But what if I have a woman
who's giving birth in the back seat of the car, and I need to get to the hospital pronto, right now, 5 minutes ago, and she's screaming her lungs out, and I can't even focus on my driving, the law still says 60 kilometers. Can I break it? Does the limitation on speed cause problems for me? Yes, it does. But that doesn't mean that the law is bad. It doesn't mean 99% of the time the law is good. The law creates safety and order. There might be exceptions, there might be problems here or there. We don't doubt that. But that doesn't mean that the law itself is invalid. Could it turn into what some people slanderously refer to as legalized prostitution? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. People could use the name of mut'ah to legalize prostitution, to justify what is essentially prostitution. Yes, that's possible. Just like people use the name of Islam to behead individuals who are innocent. That doesn't mean Islam is at fault. It doesn't mean mut'ah is invalid or wrong or anything like that. It just means that there are always people who will exploit and who will take advantage of the law. Inshallah, we've got a long Q&A session planned. If there are any questions on this, me and my wonderful colleagues are happy to answer those questions. هذا والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.